Welcome to another edition of EverybodyHatesCleveland.com, the podcast. This would be the 34th edition of said podcast. I am your host, the czar of EverybodyHatesCleveland.com. Again, I don't have a title, so I'll just come up with quirky ones as we go. I guess you could say I'm one of the columnists. I guess I'm a co-owner. I am a guy that's there. Joining me is another guy that's there. While I was less creative last time, Mike, today I will call you Mike.
Better. So much better. I mean, ultimately, as being a guy that's there, I think that's a vast improvement. I think we should, since every other site which doesn't pay its writers gives them these delightful promotions to director of editorial content of their feet. I think we need to come up with better ones, but we'll work on that off the air.
We will work on. Yeah, I did call our staff. I put it down on our website as a lineup, and then noticed a couple of days later that another site did the same thing, which I thought was amusing. But I guess when said site uses all of my ideas anyways, what can I say? That being said, let's move on. Today we are not here to bitch and moan. Well, I don't know. Maybe this is the position where if anyone's going to bitch and moan, it's third base, because we are going to be previewing third base, whereas last year we were talking about Lonnie Chisenhall, and the year before that we were talking about Carlos Santana. I guess perspective-wise, Mike, our discussion this year is going to be a lot less bombastic. And this is no offense to said Santana and said Chisenhall, who we will be talking about in future reference, and who I think might see some time at third base here and there. But that being said, the Indians did make a move, and truth be told, Hattery and I were waiting for this move to be made to do this one, because let's just say that Mike had a premonition, and we'll leave it at that. His piece was up first for a reason, mainly because he wrote it weeks ago, because he knew it was coming. Of course, the Indians recently signed Juan Uribe, and Mike, you weren't surprised by the signing. Before we get into the actual battle and who's going to start and what spring training might look at, why did you think the Indians were such a lock to sign Uribe? Of course, it had been mentioned for months, but you literally wrote that piece. It's February now. I want to say I saw that piece in almost completion in mid-January, maybe before that. What made you so sure that Juan Uribe was going to be wearing the Indians jersey this year?
He was really cheap and potentially productive, and he's a perfect pillow deal. I think we saw two potential third base fill-ins, and we're going to have to get to what we think of Urshela and whether we think the Indians are going to ease him in, or whether they're trying to protect Urshela, or whether they want to do more work with Urshela. But I think that plays into it. For me, I saw some warts with Urshela and some sort of negative warning signs, but he's 23 years old, so you have to balance those. And I think it's pretty easy to feel like the Indians rushed Urshela last year, for me. So when it comes to Uribe, he made sense. He's very cheap, and he's been very, very productive for 3 years. And I don't know if you've seen a lot of anything written about him, but he has tremendous sort of clubhouse credibility. Everywhere he's been, there have been positive articles about his ability to relate to people in the locker room of all races, creeds, youth, ages, vet, rookie. So I think that's a tremendous asset, and one that, perhaps for the we needed Giambi section of this team, I think that Uribe may fill that role as a really important veteran leader, and one who's very productive. He plays good defense at third. He has a little power. His bat's been good for the last 3 years. He's obviously old, so there's risk. But the limited cost just makes so much sense, because there's a lot of upside in terms of him stabilizing the position. And if he doesn't, he's cheap enough to cut him loose and go to Urshela and J-Ram.
Well, and I think – go ahead. No, finish that thought.
I also think he just fits really well if you have to use him as a bench player. He's someone he's really good in the locker room. He's been a bench player before, and he can fulfill that role. And a lot of guys aren't good at doing that. I think we've seen Chisenhall not be good at being a 2 or 3 day a week player. We've seen a lot of guys who struggle to do that. And I think having a guy who can do that, who's a vet, who knows how to go about his business, is really useful. So even if this flops, I don't think there's a real downside to him. And there's a lot of upside to him stabilizing the position.
Well, I think at the end of the day, you know, if you would have asked me about Uribe in December, and you did, you know, of course, you know, you look at a guy, and my first perusal with any player is age. I've seen too many old guys flame out here with the Indians in recent years, and you see a guy, you know, and of course you pay attention to players like Uribe because they do things here and there that you take note of. But when you see that the guy's 36, that's the first thing that kind of stands out. And, you know, if you don't delve into the statistics a little bit more, if you don't look at what he does and what he brings to the team, obviously, I think most people first look at that and kind of step back a little bit. If you're just an average fan, obviously this seems like a status quo move for the Indians. And honestly, maybe it is. I mean, this isn't too far different from the Rajai Davis signing. This isn't too far different from the Mike Napoli signing. As a matter of fact, many of the things that you just said about Uribe are the same things people were saying about Napoli and Davis. So it does fit the mold of a veteran presence. The question then becomes, what role did they bring him in for? And I think you obviously don't sign the guy to sit the bench initially. I think they obviously, a guy like Francona is going to want him to start. However, is that decided yet, Mike? Do you think that this could be a spring training battle? Did they sign him at a price that's low enough that Urshela could beat him out?
I don't think so. I think that honestly, Uribe is starting at third base. I think the transition could happen sooner, and I don't think that Uribe is necessarily starting 6 days a week in September. But I certainly think at this cost, and with Urshela's struggles offensively last year, they want to make sure they feel comfortable with Urshela offensively before they go with him there. And I'm not sure that spring training can kind of establish that. Maybe if they think all of his production issues were health last year, it's possible. But Uribe, I think, is here to start. I think he's also a fantastic guy for Urshela to kind of, you know, transition into third base with. I mean, Uribe is a tremendous vet. I think he'll be great working with Lindor and Urshela and perhaps Yandy Diaz in terms of making them comfortable at the big league level and helping them to sort of like move through their sophomore season. So I think there's a lot of value there.
All right, so let's look at this from Urshela's perspective, and I think that the confounding thing for me last year was that Urshela got called up. I mean, and this is you know, again, I when you follow the Indian system as long as we have, Mike, in particular, as long as I have, I mean, the past 17 years I've been watching these players come up through Carolina, and you kind of pay attention to how they move players up. Urshela gets called up. I believe it was late May last year. It might have been early June. I know it was before Lindor. I'm pretty sure it was a couple of weeks before Lindor, and I don't have it right up in front of me. Yeah. They bring him up last year mainly because of Lonnie Chisenhall. They didn't really have an answer for him after he flamed out at third base. They bring him up. He struggles, and you can talk numbers. You wrote a really good piece about his struggles last year, and there was some injury issues there as well. But here's my thing: like, what were they doing with him last year? This is the thing. Like, if you don't think that he's ready this year, after a year at the bigs, after a year of struggling, give it that. Why didn't they look for a Juan Uribe last year as opposed to just throwing Urshela there? I mean, you're talking about a guy who was struggling with injury at the beginning of the season. He missed some time at the beginning of last year at Columbus with an injury. They bring him up, surprising everybody. Not a typical Indians move. And they probably could have, and again, maybe not a guy as good as Juan Uribe, but I'm pretty sure they could have found somebody to play third base. I'm pretty sure there was a Jack Hanahan out there somewhere that they could have brought in to play third base who would have been better suited to do so. What do they, I guess, is this the front office just saying, oops, or is this something that they've seen in his swing? And we can talk about his swing in a second. Like, it seems to me that maybe they're mishandling Gio a little bit. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times you and I emphasize that you can really see when the Indians show priority for a guy. I think we talk about it the most with Jose Ramirez, not to beat up the Jose Ramirez horse, but this is a guy they rushed through the system because they believed he was big league ready, relied on him during multiple playoff pushes in his, at 21 and 22. So maybe, there is this possibility that they really think he was ready. To me, with the early season injuries, he was rushed to me, especially for a guy who, one of the things that's been really tough for me with discussing Urshela is I think he's been young for every level, which kind of can deceive you with offensive statistics, which we'll get to. I think there's development that can be done there. But he's someone who really has never shown anything particularly great offensively. And the big league level is tougher. He hasn't been significantly above average at any level offensively. And so when you get to the big leagues, you're probably going to be below average. So for me, one of the hard things has been, I think he was rushed offensively. I think Columbus, on the other hand, makes it really hard to kind of help players make adjustments because of the park. So I don't know how you handle that.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, Columbus, is what it is. Your offensive numbers generally are going to take a leap. I think the inconsistencies, with his numbers in particular in the minor leagues are very interesting to look at. When you look at the overall trends, and you were looking at his BABIP in a well done piece for Everybody Hates Cleveland a couple weeks ago. When you look at BABIP and the generalities of his season, they don't usually come out to be all that impressive. And however, if you delve into a season by season projections, there always seems to be one or two sporadic months, and there's no really connotation or connection to said months where he just has these months where he's playing out of his mind, which is interesting to me. And I can't quite figure this out, Mike, because that could lend itself to an erratic player, or it could lend itself to a guy who's still learning the ropes. Based on what I just heard from you, based on you discussing his age at every level, would you say that this is a kid who still needs to develop consistency? Or is this, it's possible that this is what we get with Urshela. If you look at the piece I wrote about Urshela last year, looking at his development, the swing development over the years, and how he's over the years listened to his coaches and changed his swing to get more spring in his swing and get a quicker bat. Is it just possible that this is a guy who tinkers too much all the time and is just going to be erratic offensively? Or is it just age? Or have we just not figured it out yet? I mean, is this a guy who just needs another year?
I'll say that first I'm going to start with a really positive sign. His strikeout rate's going to get better, and his minor league strikeout rates are awesome. So that's great. So he makes a ton of contact. To me, I think one of the detriments has been that he makes a ton of contact. When I looked at his BABIP and then paired it with his major league exit velocities, which aren't good, I think one of the things you see with Urshela is that the contact quality isn't very good. There's a lot of soft contact, but there's also contact outside the zone. I think he's someone who has tremendous sort of bat to ball skills. He makes a ton of contact, but there are two big issues. He doesn't have really good contact quality, and he doesn't walk. So one of those has to improve for him to be good offensively at the big league level. And he's just turned 24, so that's pretty young. So you can make these adjustments, certainly. And I think that he can start making better quality of contact. I think they can make adjustments with that. But until he makes those, it's really hard for me to bet on him being something really good at third base. And so that's why I get the Uribe deal. We pick on the Indians all the time for not sort of trying to fix their holes or not put something more stable there. And then they go and get Uribe, who's been really stably productive for a while. And so, I absolutely get the urge to play Urshela, but I think, until he shows that he can either, fix that walk rate, or he can really improve the contact quality, which he makes a ton of contact, so he should be able to do. Until he does that, I think it's really hard to see him being solid offensively for me.
Well, we shall see. I think personally, and this is just on a personal level, knowing him, at the minor league level, I think, last year is a hard level for me to even constitute. He was hurt. He got caught. It was a wonky season for him. He was hurt early in the minors. He was playing well. He gets called up. There were signs of him playing pretty well early, and then he ends up getting hurt. I don't know that we have a picture of him, but here's where I draw the line with it. Obviously, management and front office has questions. Now, as a fan, you can debate whether or not those questions about Giovanny Urshela are valid or not. But they had enough questions to go out and get a Juan Uribe. When we get to the outfield eventually in these previews, obviously there are some holes there that they could have addressed. And instead of addressing the outfield with a few guys who are still available and may be cost effective, they go out and they get Uribe instead. So I think I'm going to just draw the line there. I'm not going to really make any connotations towards that other than this. So Juan Uribe for sure will be our starting third baseman. If he struggles, Mike, Gio's the guy they're bringing up, right? I mean, and I only mention that because I don't want to spend a lot of time on Yandy Diaz. Yandy Diaz is older than Urshela. That's the funny thing here. Yandy Diaz has some interesting intangibles, and I don't have any stats pulled up on him. Could you see a situation where Yandy Diaz, who I assumed was going to start the year off in Columbus, could you see a scenario where Yandy Diaz continues his progress? Again, he's got good back control. He's got a lot of the intangibles that you want to see. He doesn't have a lot of power. Could Yandy, and he's not as good defensively as Gio. I mean, could there be a situation where Yandy moves his way past Gio?
I really think there is. I do. I don't know. The one thing with Diaz, his plate discipline profile is amazing. It's off the charts, but he's also the same age as Urshela. And it's time. It really is close to time for these two guys. Once you get to 24, you need to make your adjustments. You need to be at the big league level. You need to be showing that you can make adjustments there. So, I think there's a really good chance that Yandy could leapfrog him just with his play discipline. But, his defense, I have gotten really different sort of responses on his defense. And I think Yandy's stock is really climbing. And I've heard anything from he's below average to he's above average. And that's a big difference. And for a team that's built on pitching, betting on a young bat who may not have great defense, I'd rather bet on Urshela with, plus defense. But I think you made a great point about sort of the organization addressing third. I mean, this is a team that, they failed on Frazier, but they've pursued Todd Frazier pretty strongly. They pursued Brett Lawrie to play third base. Both of these would be 2-year solutions. So I think that there is sort of an organization noting that they don't have a ton of confidence right now in Urshela. And maybe they would have adjusted, but I think that Urshela's stock has waned a little bit this year. And I think that, watching how the organization's reacted to his last season is important.
Well, and we can sort of end it there. I do want to mention Uribe a little bit more. And the interesting thing with regards to him, you mentioned him potentially eventually kind of melding into the bench should that arise. Maybe he struggles and they have to make another move. But Uribe does have time spent at shortstop and second base. Could he fill in at some point off the bench, as you mentioned, a good clubhouse guy? I mean, eventually he could kind of say Kipnis gets hurt. I mean, this is a guy who could feasibly be used as a utility guy should the need arise, couldn't he?
Yeah, I think except for shortstop, I think his body is a little different when he was playing shortstop.
Looks like he ate shortstop, but
yeah.
That's beside the point. I mean, if he and Bartolo Colon were on opposite ends of the teeter-totter, let's just say the teeter-totter would be snapping twice, but that's neither here nor there. I guess that on that note,
we'll close it out.
You know what? One last thing. Again, let's go back 2 years to where Carlos Santana was our third baseman, and 1 year ago to where Lonnie Chisenhall was our third baseman. And, I take a lot of heat for my stance on Lonnie Chisenhall. I do, he does have valid points to this team. I mean, we'll get to that in a couple of weeks or a couple of podcasts, but we're talking about two actual good third basemen. I mean, these guys can defend. And I think, again, as we mentioned with J-Ram, we haven't even talked about J-Ram, who could fill in a hole here. I think what we have now is professional third baseman and professional second baseman. And, of course, our next conversation is going to be shortstop. And I don't think we have a whole lot to add there. That'll be the less see, this wasn't controversial, Mike. We agreed with everything. I mean, come on. I do love Gio. I heart you, Gio. All right, we'll close it up there. Again, if you're listening to this, much like our last podcast, here's what we need from you if you're a listener and you want to hear this podcast consistently. We've got a lot of plans in the works for this season. We've got a lot of regular podcasts planned from baseball to basketball to football to anything you could possibly imagine, movies and TV shows. We have a lot of plans going forward. Here's what alls we're asking you to do. Go to iTunes, click on podcasts, go to the search bar, type Everybody Hates Cleveland, and leave us a rating. That's it. Give us 5 stars, leave us a comment. We will read your comments on air, positive or negative. I don't care, as long as I'm allowed to read them without getting thrown out of life. Again, we're not in it for the money. This is a fun hobby for us. We like talking sports, and this isn't for us to overtake YouTube with the grandest Cleveland podcast of all. We happen to listen to the other podcasts in Cleveland, and we do our part for them. So, like I said, if you get a chance, let's get some comments. I'd love to see us pass some of the other ones, just to say we did it. So that being said, give us a ranking, and if you have a few seconds, give us a sentence or two and let us know what you like. And of course, don't hesitate to tell us what you don't like about Mike Hattery. All right, on that note, on to shortstop.